Boxing Truth here. Let me talk a little bit about Sergey Lipinets, the newly crowned IBF junior welterweight champion of the world. It was a very good prize fight between him and Kondo, Japanese fighter, on Saturday night at the Barclays Center in the first fight of the televised portion of the Showtime show. And it was a good, competitive, tough battle that Lipinets had to pull out against Kondo. I'm sure these so-called boxing fans are going to say Lipinets ain't much, he wasn't impressive, he struggled with this unknown cat. But the thing is, he had a tough fight against a highly rated contender, a guy coming in with a lot of confidence, a guy who had never been knocked out in 37 pro fights, very seasoned, very experienced, and he showed why he was a qualified contender in this division, because he came into the fight winning 8 straight fights, was fighting guys with winning records, fought guys with undefeated records coming into the fight, gotten wins over those opponents. Whether you know them or not, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Kondo earned his position as the most highly ranked guy behind Sergey Lipinets, and he was qualified to fight for a vacant title. He was a tough opponent. He came to win. He didn't come to lay down. He took a lot of hard shots, showed his toughness, and he really tried to break down Lipinets mentally. Had some rough moments in that ring. The headbutt, some big shots landed, got Lipinets' attention. But Lipinets showed class in that performance. I mean, he was controlling the fight early on, though he won the majority of the early rounds of the fight, maybe 5 of the first 6 rounds. You could argue he won, but then the fight started to get tough. Kondo started to push harder. He wasn't going to be denied. He was going to come to fight. He was going to come to win, and it was a real fight. It wasn't no Heymanized controlled puppet who was going to lay down for Lipinets. This is a guy Heyman couldn't manipulate. It was a fighter with a different promotional company that came to win, and he laid it out all on the line, and he really gave Lipinets a tough, good scrap. But I was impressed with Lipinets. I was impressed with his boxing skills. I was impressed with his power at times. He showed good quality punches. He couldn't hurt Kondo, but Kondo has never been stopped. He showed how durable, and he really came into the fight with a lot of confidence and a lot of momentum. So it was a good fight for Lipinets, and only his 13th pro bout. He's really being fast-tracked to the top, and he already has a world title around his waist. Perhaps they'll move into a different direction and move up in weight to secure bigger fights, since it's not really many big fights at 140-pound weight class. But of course, so-called boxing fans are going to criticize Lipinets. They're going to say he wasn't impressed because he couldn't really destroy an unheralded guy, but a highly ranked guy who had never been stopped, and coming into the fight with much momentum going into the fight. He was a solid opponent. He had a lot of will to win, which is what made the fight competitive, but Lipinets just had more skill, more arsenal in his offense, and he outlasted Kondo in the championship rounds. Kondo finally slowed down after, he really pushed the pace for the first 10 rounds, wouldn't stop, kept coming forward, really put a lot of pressure on Lipinets. It was a tough fight, but then he slowed down in the championship rounds, and that's where Lipinets separated himself and became world champion. Overall, I was impressed with Lipinets' performance. I mean, it was a tough fight, but he didn't falter. He mentally stayed in there with a guy that was putting a lot of pressure on him, and he outlasted him. And it was a fight he had to overcome some adversity, overcame a cut, was getting hit with some big shots, was dealing with a guy that wouldn't lay down for him, that wouldn't quit, and show a lot of will to win. So it was a solid performance, and an impressive performance in terms of how he dealt with adversity, how he was able to overcome some obstacles in the ring, and overcome a live opponent who came to win and try to win that IBF strap. So looking at Lipinets' career, He's only had 13 fights, and it's pretty impressive his opposition, who he's been fighting with his 13 fights. He's fighting, I mean, just look at his resume. I mean, undefeated fighters, well-rated contenders, very early in his career. So he's really being fast-tracked to the top, and now he is one of the champions in the 140-pound weight class. Let me tell you something right now. Sergey Lipinets was one of Terence Crawford's most formidable challengers at 140 pounds. In my eyes, Lipinets is better than anybody Crawford has beaten. Lipinets has skills. He's got power in both hands. Just because he couldn't knock out a guy who never been knocked out doesn't mean he can't punch. But he's definitely better than anybody Terence Crawford has beaten. And Kondo was tougher than most of Terence Crawford's opponents. Kondo could have given Crawford a pretty good fight. Not saying he would win, but you know, he came to win, unlike the majority of Crawford's opponents. So that's a fight most likely we'll never see between Lipinets and Crawford, and that's fine. I'm just fucking with you, Crawford fanboys. If he fights Jeff Horn, all will be forgiven. To move up for a bigger fight. But if he doesn't, then you can call that a blatant duck of Terence Crawford. All of a sudden he vacates when he finally gets a formidable challenge. When he finally has to make a mandatory, something Crawford hasn't yet done in his career. At junior welterweight, at least. He did fight a mandatory in the lightweight division, my bad. But he didn't fight not one mandatory at 140. And became undisputed somehow. Without fighting a mandatory. But, you know, there's going to be some naysayers for Lipinets. They're going to say he ain't shit, even though he's fighting way better opponents in just 13 fights in. I mean, look at the opponents Crawford fought in his 13th fight. Look at the bums he was fighting in ballrooms in the middle of nowhere in Denver. Who he fight in his 13th fight? Let me show you the difference between the progression of both fighters. Crawford fought Anthony Mora, a guy who was 15-6, coming into the fight with 6 straight losses, and Crawford knocked him out in the first round. At least Crawford did what he was supposed to do in that fight. But look at the opposition he was fighting at only 13 fights in compared to Sergey Lipinets. It's a totally different career progression. Totally different. Lipinets is fighting well-rated contenders, and he's not even in 15 fights in his professional career. Crawford was fighting guys with freaking 6 straight losses in the majority of his fights going into the fight. Have been knocked out multiple times. So Crawford's progression was way different. He needed to be protected, needed to be fed a lot of no-hopers, while Lipinets has been fighting well-rated contenders and climbing the rankings since his 6th pro fight. Since his 6th pro fight, he's been fighting very experienced professional fighters. So, huge difference in career progressions. Lipinets, let's see where his career goes from here. There's really not many desirable fights at 140 pounds. He could fight Rances Barthélemy. That'd be an interesting fight. Him and I's fighter as well. That's a fight that could be made. Looking elsewhere, there's just not many big names. He's more inclined to move up to welterweight and try to get shots at Thurman, try to get a shot at Spence, Danny Garcia, a fight with Sean Porter. There's just bigger opportunities, bigger money fights to be made at welterweight for Lipinets, since it's not really much he could work with at 140. Sure, he could stay there and make a little defense, but not for much money. The only really doable fight right here at 40 is an eventual fight with Rances Barthélemy. Other than that, there's not really any big fights or really great opportunities. Don't see Lipinets and Jose Ramirez hooking up anytime soon. No top-ranked fighters. Amir Imam, Prograis. Not really much to work with at 140, but overall, it was a good, tough fight for Lipinets. I mean, it was impressive to me. Maybe not to other people, but when a fighter deals with adversity and he's able to overcome it, that shows a lot of character in the ring. And I look for more of those traits, those character traits, than just guys beating up on heavy bags, like Crawford was doing many of his first earlier fights of his professional career. But it is what it is. Crawford and Lipinets will probably never hook up, and whatever. That's fine. As long as Crawford fights Jeff Horn, and we'll see what the result of that fight will be. But for Lipinets, I expect him to move up to welterweight and pursue bigger opportunities. And I'll be looking forward to his next fight. This is Boxing Truth. I'm out.